Well, I got to tell you, I've been thinking a lot about this actually, and you're going to have to indulge me. Unfortunately, I want to apologize in advance. I want to make some general comments about time. This one is about the relationship between living with a disability and time, right? And the opening sentence of the description was have you ever noticed when you live with a disability, your clock isn't exactly the same clock as what's around you, right? That there's a big difference there. And I like to think about my experience with disability. I'll make some comments about that, but as kind of a study in time, right? For me, but first I want to say some things about time, and this is where you have to indulge my philosophical makeup. I think it's interesting, right? Um, time, as you know, whatever that is, it's a funny thing. And simply put, I don't think our minds are very good at it, right? Like if you like, our minds have a hard time processing time. Did you know that in physics, time is often defined as what clocks measure? So think about that circular definition, right? It's like whatever it is, we can't make it an object exactly, but whatever it is that clocks that are really repetitive measure, that must be what time is, right? So it's this really sneaky way that physics get around the problem. There's also some things about time that are pretty interesting. It seems to flow forward, right? So it's pretty hard for us to go back and live the minute before. Like I'm never going to get to as far as I'm aware, to re-say that beginning apology from a philosophical point of view. That's gone now. Although now I have the feeling and the sensation of dread about how I botched it, right? So like now I've got both, and although we can't go back, our human consciousness has this ability to bring it forward, right? Which is, but not completely forward, only aspects of it, only parts of it, and it's less tangible as memory than it is as experience, right? It does seem to another thing about time is it never appears as an object before our eyes. Like we don't directly perceive time. We might be able to perceive the watch that is an indication of it, but it's not something that we perceive, right? Which is actually, you know, that's an important point, but it does seem, doesn't it? I mean, I'm using these vague words, but we do have some sensation of duration, right? Right, like that's one of, remember, I'm all about following sensations, right? And paying attention to mind body sensations. Um, you know, another just kind of observation about time is that although our minds aren't good at it, it seems like my body's got a pretty steady relationship with time, right? Like it's already happening. It's been happening throughout my entire life, which seems like a funny thing to say. It's kind of like, but no, actually, it's pretty amazing that it's the one. And it seemed like we are kind of events. Like at a certain point, we came into space and a sense of time, right? And we seem to occupy and have duration, right? So that happens, and we tend to, and actually, when we're kids, we're actually growing, like we're occupying more space and time. It's constantly shifting. We've lived for longer periods of time, so all these things are experiences we have, right? But again, it's not like it's an object. It's not like it's connected. My body actually will start to, our bodies tend to, wear out kind of similarly in time. There's certain ages where we're actually considered old. So our bodies, although don't stay here forever, they seem to be pretty steady with time. Our minds do not do that. Time, our perception of time is such a varying thing. Now, to make this slightly more tangible, Remember how slow time passed when you were a kid?
Mhm. Yep.
Thumbs up if you ever had a car ride that the 2 hours seemed like 17 days. Like, oh my God, how can it move so slow? But then, have you ever noticed as an adult that it seems to take way longer to get somewhere in a car than it does to get home? That some sort of expectation does something to the perception of time, right? That like there's quicker to get there or longer to get there. It's like, wow, I'm late, I'm this, I'm that, right? All those things. And I think about like, I wonder, and ever notice, if you notice that time went slow more as you're a kid, I remember I thought a summer was an incredible amount of time. And right now I'm already worried that summer is almost already over. Like when
Mhm.
I got plans in there, it's like, oh, for God's sakes, right? And that it seems like, does anyone experience that time seems to be going faster as you age? Right?
Yes.
Like, what the hell? And I sit there and I, of course, because I'm me, I start thinking about stuff, why that's the case, right? What's happening in relationship to sensation and the mind body relationship, such that time can have so much variance, or our perception of time. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them, I remember this thing was, I used to end a lot of my public talks about this. I used to tell the story at the end, and I used to tell this story to showcase the freedom that we can have with our bodies, right? But I remember my son was about 3 or 4 years old, and he was trying to watch Sesame Street, right? And he was naked from the waist down, just had a shirt on, but he's trying to focus his attention on the screen. And now I know my son has, he's had attention deficit issues, so he was really struggling. So, but he's trying to focus enough to watch Sesame Street. So he gets on the couch and he hangs off upside down, so his head is on the floor. So he's doing an inversion with his legs naked up on the bed, trying to sit there and watch Sesame Street upside down. And I often tell that story to go like, that's when we didn't judge our bodies, right? I usually emphasize the nakedness of it, right? Like the freedom of thinking that who cares how I look like when I'm watching time. But I also think about watching him trying to quell his body in order to deaden long enough to have attention, right? And so it seems to me that one of the things that happens when those car rides are forever in a car as a kid is that the body, we're more like becoming bodies when we're kids, and time then takes on texture when you're a kid. Like it's almost like you can almost feel it just taking forever. But notice that happens. Have you ever noticed how much slower time goes when you're waiting in a grocery store line? When you're waiting for someone else, the perception of time starts to slow down, right? Or when you feel rushed. But this idea that the body, when time gains texture, right? When it's perceived, like there are all those funny things, like why does these old adages, a watch kettle never boils. I tried to do that the other day, watching my water boil. It took forever. I couldn't believe it, right? Like I could not believe that it could take so long, but it wasn't really that long by the way that the clock measures, right? But that this idea that our minds are constantly in flux, and when we actually inhabit experience with our bodies, time tends to slow down unless we're super occupied. So what's the difference between Paul as a 4-year-old and me as his dad at that point, when I was like 38, is that I could also focus my attention and see beauty. Like, I think about someone that's able to sit on a bench and watch and feel the textures of outdoors. And that's something more and more rewarding as we age, like being able to let there be slow time. So there's a couple of experiences little stories. I was watching a kid on a water slide, and he was so excited because there was newfound freedom. He and his mom would go up the stairs, up the ladder, and then go down the slide. And the mom, because he was little, he was probably like 5, and the mom did it with him the first like 5 times, being a good sport. But the kid, you can imagine, absolutely wanted to go 50 times, which he correspondingly did. The mom finally got tired of going up and down the stairs of the slide, so she positioned her chair to watch him. And this boy would go down the slide, and as soon as he hit the water, he'd leap out and start to run around the corner, right, to go up the stairs again, to go down again. And the mom didn't, because it was near a pool, didn't want him to run, right? Safety, moms have to be the safety patrol because that's part of their job, right? And so what this little boy figured out to do was he'd get out of the water slow, and then he'd walk slow after getting caught like 3 times running right there. He'd walk slow, and then right when he got out of his mom's sight, he'd accelerate really hard and run really fast, and then go up the water and go back down again. So he had this really strange pacing going on. You're right. And I was thinking, my God, we're wired for the next experience. Like, think about, we get upset when our internet doesn't come fast enough, or when, things are slow to download. And we're talking seconds difference between how something like downloads and not. And we get like, oh, this is taking forever. Our minds actually get trained with expectation into certain perceptions of time. And so like, I remember thinking, well, what if we're wired for the next experience, and what we only do is experience time? We can't see it, we can't directly perceive it, right? And it happens to both our mind and our body. I want to put forward in this afternoon, time's a teacher, right? And this is one of the opportunities of living with a disability. And hopefully we can facilitate a discussion about this. There's another story I heard, when mind tries to do time, right? Which is not very good at. I remember this is a simple, stupid story, but maybe not so stupid because I've been thinking about it for 30 years. It's not stupid for me. It's a story of a monk coming down from the sleeping dormitories down the stairs, and there's the student on the bottom of the stairs, and the monk comes down the stairs and is shaking his head, going like this. And the younger monk says, "Brother, what's wrong?" And the older monk goes, "I've got too many things to do for the time I have in this day." And as soon as he utters the words, he stops on the stairs, turns around, and starts walking back up the stairs. And the monk says, where are you going? What are you doing? He goes, "I need to go meditate some more." The idea that when our mind gets occupied with time, we tend to lose it. So one of the very many things why time speeds up as we're adults, we're more scheduled. We're having more anticipatory fatigue. We're not having the texture of time, right? Which is not, I'm sure I'm not a great meditator, but like, I'm sure that, when you meditate long enough, at first time has texture, and then it goes to another state where it's not felt so slowly either, right? So what I'm talking about is, what's the importance of moving slower sometimes in a yoga practice? Should you practice different velocities in movement? And if so, why? So by the end of today, I want to be talking about or practicing using time as a variable in poses, right? Where I think it's a mistake to think that by practicing time, it means that everything has to go slower. In fact, I think that's a big mistake, right? I think sometimes you have to speed up in certain poses. All right, so now to the piece on, so that's my long-winded, don't take time for granted is all I want to say, and admit that your mind sucks at it, right? It really does weird things with the perception of time, right? Okay, so now here's where I want we to end more of disability. So start layering in disability. I don't know about you, but my life takes a lot more time than I like to admit, right? Where and I've heard healthcare workers say this, that people to disability are, a lot of them are just chronically late. And I'd like to say that because I'm an optimist, right? Because I never want to admit how long it takes me to get things done. Like, so, oh, I should be able to get showered already in half hour. That's a lie. It doesn't work like that. But it's also, I don't always want to like think about, or even to get ready for bed for me, right? There are these things that I think that, oh, the idea of just being able to get into bed, can anyone just get into bed anymore? I mean, like, it's like there's about 7 things I have to do before I get into bed, right? And it's like, there's no such thing as, oh, I'm just going to take a, there's just too many rituals and things that I have to do. So there are places where my life takes time. And if I think about it too much, I'm not sure what happens to me, right? Like I get kind of discouraged or, or something. So there's this really important thing that I do where I'm not really the best time realist that's ever been here, right? Because I kind of have to live in a different relationship. So, and the other thing about living with disability is there's, living with a disability and caring for someone with a disability are both studies in time, right? I don't know about you, but are you really self-conscious about making people wait for you? Right? There's a thing that happens from people around, and I hope we can talk about some of these things, but there's a thing that happens where if I'm moving slowly and not in a rush, people around me often think that somehow that's hurting my soul or something, and they hurry up and want, there's at times a bad thing. It's a shame. So when I used to get my wheelchair in and out of my car, this is a perfect example, which I wish I got a ramp sooner, but it would be a process where I take off each wheel, I take it apart, and it would take time. And people would desperately want to help, as if like there was something shameful happening that I should be embarrassed about, that they needed to rush in and try to speed me up, right? And because there's that some kind of strange perception that somehow taking time and dignity are somehow at odds with each other, right? And that we should help slow time, right, with people. How about anyone else? I'm curious, someone is willing to talk a little bit about how they think about the time it takes to manage their day, right? Like, we can start off by sharing, what wisdom do you have for other people, right? For, or if you could, train your family and friends to know something. Anyone want to say anything here? Please, God, please don't make me sit in my own time.
I
I'm
don't know
going
if
to
you have
call on
any.
people. Rodrigo, what have you figured out?
I would say that I am still in the process, Marco.
Mhm.
I've got a disability that was acquired. I became a paraplegic 7 years ago, and somehow my mind kept running time and in its own time, let's say, but my body slowed down so much. I just like start a yoga business, for example, and I am giving classes online, and to run the outside of the biz, like marketing, accounting, everything, it takes so much time that it's like I didn't realize how hard it was until I started. And I see my peers doing all of these things, running all of this business, and then I'm like, why am I not able to do all of that?
That's why people have, Rodrigo, just so you know, there's this thing called having a staff
yeah,
that actually,
and
there is so much. It's funny because I also think like,
Yeah.
how are people having time? Like, I can't figure out where people have time for social media. Like,
Yeah,
I'm stunned about that. Like
yeah.
all the time. Like, where do they find the pockets of time to know what's happening on Twitter all the time? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's like I realize, might sound cliche, that everything take its time, otherwise I get frustrated. So I just step back. It's like everything takes its time. You're gonna get where I want to go, but it's like somebody who is non-disabled might get there before you. But it's like just like keep on going, keep on doing things. It's hard to not be frustrated though. I'm learning. It's a learning curve for me to get where I want
So
to
do you
be.
think, and this is a really good example of something that I've struggled with too, and I know a lot of people have struggled in their own case, and I'd like someone else to try to describe this. But when you, like, for example, try to get things done or get ready in the morning, and you try to use your will
Mm,
to hurry you along,
yeah.
okay? Isn't that when will is used on time,
Mm,
isn't that one of the big causes of frustration,
yeah, it is.
right? Like, and you usually screw up,
Yeah.
right? When you
And,
try to rush certain things. So I
and
agree
you
that,
cannot rush. And you cannot rush. When you live with a disability, it's like the first skill you need to develop is patience. You know, but patience and time, it's two another things as well. It's like it's you need to have patience, but even though it's like you need to manage your time. It's
yeah, and our
difficult.
stories, part of what I want to try to have us get out here are what are our stories in relationship to time. And Audrey, I'm going to call you in a second. So like Rodrigo, when I realized a couple things, when you've only been injured for 7 years, but not only, it seems like a long time, right?
Mm,
But I remember thinking, and I'm still 43 years later, as I'm aging, confronting different levels of my disability that I didn't know,
mm,
right? Like, what it means to be disabled is a constant learning process.
yeah.
And I think that I say this kind of flippantly, but I kind of say to people when they come to me as a student and want to be yoga, it's like, I don't think you fully know that you're disabled for about 10 years. I think it
Hmm.
literally takes that much time,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, that seems ridiculous, except
Hmm.
it's not ridiculous, because like as you're starting a business, all of a sudden, but the thing is, Rodrigo, I think that everybody struggles with that. No one shares their struggles as much as they present their successes,
Yeah.
especially on social media, right?
Hmm.
But like there's so many. If I were to, of course, my staff knows this way too much, and I'm sure I'm relatively irritating to work with. Um, there's so many things that fall off my table. I kind of have this built in, like, okay, here's another place where I just don't waste with freaking time.
Yeah.
I don't have drawers. I have
Mm,
shelves that my clothes are on. Okay. And if I try to keep those shelves with all neat folded laundry, I'm
mm.
going straight not only to hell, but to Lulu, right? Because I will be constantly folding and sitting there and working my arms too much and trying to, anyone tried to pull out a shirt off of a shelf,
Yeah.
it's like hell. Wait, I want the bottom shirt. Oh, wait, I'm supposed to, shit, I got to hold this pile up, and then I'm falling down, and I'm just like, oh, for God's sakes, my closet's going to I just have to accept that
Hmm.
that's not the place where I'm going to spend too much of my time,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm going to have to figure out, and to some people's chagrin, right? There are other places in my life where it's like, yeah, that's a whole thing. So Audrey, just say what you're gonna say. I kind of want to get these kind of funny places where we have time secrets
Mm.
out, because everyone on the call has them. Everybody does. Audrey.
Hi everyone. I'll just start by saying that I do know Rodrigo and he's a fantastic teacher, so you should continue. um, I think for me it's been 7 years as well as disabled, and for me it's chronic illness. So it's a bit different from being in a wheelchair or having an accident and things like that, because for me, actually, time doesn't mean that much. It's more my energy that means a lot. So I have a lot of time. However, I don't have a lot of energy. And so it's kind of a shift in mentality when I got ill, to actually realize that, yes, I did have 24 hours in the day, but it's not the same as everybody else. I can't just, jump out of bed and go like, whoopee. I have to plan every single thing in my day, and the day after, and the day after, and sometimes weeks ahead. And it just means like, I don't know how to explain it because I'm still thinking about it.
No, and
But
it's an issue that everybody is thinking
yes,
about, and not just with disability, but like it's interesting to think about it in terms of energy levels, right? Are you able to accept that you have to rest? Does
yeah,
resting help?
yeah.
Does it actually help though?
It did. I have a weird relationship with rest, because I think rest is not a good word. I
Yeah,
think
whichever. Like
rest, rest should be enjoyable. It should be like watching, your favorite TV show, hanging out with your dog, going for a walk, something nice that just rest your mind and your body, and just, whereas when you have an energy limiting illness, you and it's not so much that you crash. Sometimes you crash, and that's crisis mode, and that's very different. But you also have to plan in your day sometimes to just not do anything.
Would a better
And
word
it's
be
not,
recuperation time?
yeah, it is. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's fine. Sometimes you're well enough to watch Netflix or do a bit of yoga or whatever, but it's rest is too positive for me in some way. I would love to just be able to rest a lot more.
Yeah,
But it
it's
does mean like
interesting.
yeah, go on. Sorry.
It's interesting because those of us on the call with chronic pain, like lying in bed for too long is not an option, right?
No.
It's too confrontive. Like if I can stay in bed for 7 hours, maybe 8, I'm damn lucky. And that was because I battled the last 3 or 4, right? Like
Yeah.
I willfully went, okay, this is gonna hurt, and I'm gonna fall asleep in the pain, right? In the discomfort. And so pain is another thing that slows down time, right? And when you don't feel escape. And so all these things are good. I want to go to some of the hands that are up, but let's keep this, we're kind of on the same thing. And I like, Audrey, what you said here about it's not just time, it's energy levels, because of course they're deeply related, right? And like rest time, recuperation time, slower time
Yeah.
is actually one of the things to practice, right?
One of the things, I'll just finish with that. One of the things that I've learned is that rest or recuperation is productive. We have, I mean, I have a hard time with like being productive and comparing myself to other people, like Rodrigo just said. But actually, if you don't rest, if you don't plan those time in your day to just not produce, then you're gonna crash. And for me, like seeing those messages, it really, really helped me like to not feel ashamed, not feel guilty, thinking like I should be doing Instagram content, or I should be working harder, I should be caring for the world, whatever it is that you think you should be doing, is actually dropping this and just thinking, no, rest is productive. It's actually filling up my cup, or whatever, you want.
Yeah, and that's part of
But
what,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, and all the marketing stuff. Laura, I want to keep going. I'm thinking about Rodrigo and teaching classes, and like I get that. Where does all the time come from? Laura, your hands up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yeah, I have a really difficult relationship with time. I always have had. And I I lie to myself constantly about how long it takes to do things. Like I was born with this disability and I actively tell myself the lie, like, Lord, you will do that in half an hour. I've never done it in half an hour ever, once, since birth, ever. And I will still actively be like, I will get that done in half an hour. Or I realized in the last 4 or 5 years that I think being on time is arriving in my car at the place on the time. That's my concept of being on time.
Not to get it in and out and the
Now, if you
final,
actually have to get a
find it
wheelchair out
over
of the
the
car and
end.
how far you're away from the building, like I factor that in never. Is it raining, which it usually is where I live a lot of the time. Like I think driving to the place and parking is being on time. And my friends have sort of learned to accept that, like the 10 minutes they will wait for me. Like they're like, Laura's in the car park. Okay.
Do you have any good excuses for being a couple minutes late to online things?
Huh?
Because that works for physical things. I find myself, even when I try, I'm slightly late, even when to online Zoom things.
Well, it trickles into everything. Then that's the problem, is that it's become sort of like a sickness. Like, because I can tell myself like I'll totally be on time for that thing, and like it's amazing how much you can convince yourself that you can do something that you have never once done, like without aid. Like,
No, but I think there's wisdom and energetic direction to a point in practicing a healthy level of denial, right?
do you?
Oh, I do. I not just there, but I think that denial is a way to focus energy too. Like I don't want to think all day long about all the things I have to do all the time to manage through a day. Like
Yeah,
there
sure.
are things where I don't want to always be thinking about all the things I could be doing to make my life better, because I have to get some shit done.
Yeah,
Right?
that's true.
Like I don't want to just be in active managing mode. I do just want to live. And so I think that
Yeah.
there's
I think it was a huge source of, like, as they say, comparative suffering as a child. Like it was a huge, like I suffered a lot from comparing myself to the able-bodied people how long they spent doing things. And I would just compare myself against all the other kids and be like, what is wrong with you?
I want to unpack that and try to get you to unpack that. So two things I'd like. First of all, I love the trickles in like a sickness. I'm going to try to like,
It is.
I love that
It's
phrase,
like a
by the way.
seeping sickness.
That I'm late, it's trickling as sickness. But this idea of comparative suffering, like this idea that your clock and the world's clock has to be in sync, right? That's something that it is. I mean, being on time, you hear all these things that are also true. If you're late, you're not being respectful of people's time, right? There's all these things that I have good intentions, right? But this idea that you wanted things that do things as quickly, one of the stories that I hear from you consistently, Laura, is that you're always trying to catch up and fit in.
Catch up. Yeah.
And that's just because, but the motivation of that is what, do you think? It's a simple question I'm asking, I think.
I just felt behind all the time as a young child. I just was and that was a message as well from a lot of teachers and a lot of medical professionals of like, Laura won't hit this benchmark, but the other kids will, and Laura's not keeping up with this like the other kids are. And so I really learned to internalize that I was behind everybody. And it really kind of spread out in adult life. I took it on as a real sort of like failure of like, I've done something wrong, rather than just being like, your clock is not the same as their clock, which, is something that I try very hard to tell myself now. But it's
so before I go to Dave, does anyone like, so let's say you're someone on the call that wasn't born with a disability. So Laura was born with spina bifida, right? So hers is a congenital issue, right? And so imagine for a second that her sense of self isn't formed enough. Like at 13, I was a little farther formed, right? Some of you that have onset of issues as an adult, right, had already realized enough boundary to recognize, right, that no, you aren't lacking because you're not hitting all the benchmarks, right? Right. And I'm curious for people, and yet we still fall prey to it no matter where things happen and descend into our lives, right? But I'm curious on the call if somebody can describe how, especially if they weren't born with a disability or a kid with a disability, um, at what, how would you describe the sensation of realizing that those benchmarks don't matter or you shouldn't internalize them? What would you say to Laura as a 7-year-old girl, right? To say, hey, like what energy would you try to communicate? This is what time gets so hard, right? Because your insight grows over time. But someone try to think, what would you say to someone that thinks they have to keep up? Like I'm having a different version of that with my son, who is going to be taking an extra semester graduate from college. And I'm saying, oh my God, it's okay. You changed your major. But
Yeah.
he's thinking, oh
You're
no,
running out of time. Yeah.
I'm screwed up. I'm not,
Mhm.
so we do this. What advice do you have to anyone on the call for that sickness that trickles in? Rodrigo, I see your hand up. Someone else jump in too. Rodrigo, start talking. So it looks like you're about to lean forward, Samantha. I can see you about to lean forward.
Hi,
Yeah.
I am leaning forward. This is something I think about a lot. I have MS, and so for those of us, there are different ways that this affects, there are different disabilities. So there's the acute disability that happens suddenly. One day you're able-bodied and the next day you're not. And then with MS, it's something that it's like a long, slow fall over time. And your sense of time evolves in a very different way. And there's always a lag. So I always, as my disability gets worse, I'm still thinking I can do things. I'm always late because I'm still operating the way I was last year, and this year's different. And there's always this sort of disconnect, this sort of cognitive dissonance, because it's always changing. And then you add aging to that and, other stuff. But I've done a lot of work with young people, coaching them on their lives and careers. And I say, and I've coached a lot of people with MS over the years, in addition. And I always tell people there are a lot of ways to build a life, which is really my message, whether it's to my own son and his friends or people with disabilities. I think where we get stuck is that we think we have to be in some kind of lockstep with how other people spend their time, use their time, value their time. We think that there's a model that we have to fit, and that our ability to fit that model is somehow indicative of our value and our capacity. Where what I realize is some of the people that I know who are just incredibly wise and powerful, they don't fit in those boxes. And guess what? They don't, even if they could, they don't want to, because I find that I think as a society, we're all kind of getting to this. One of the gifts of the pandemic has been a lot of people have been taken out of time, and time has changed. Like for the first time, am hearing lots of people who have no disability be like, I have no idea, like they're all confused about time suddenly. And I feel like I'm way ahead of them because
Right.
I'm like, oh yeah, I got this. I
Yeah.
already get how like disorienting all of this is, right? Like, welcome to our club. And for me, it has been a blessing because I feel like other people have had to look at time differently and experience differently. And in a way, it's made them more compassionate and more patient with me, because they're all suddenly like really trying to figure it out. And so I do think that those of us with disabilities have something we can teach other people, because we already have a sense of this. And so, if you have felt out of step all your life, if you have felt like you can't, that you have some delay, or you have some way you haven't been able to keep up with the world, and now the world is all sort of discombobulated, you have something that you can share back and say, this has been my experience. I've been discombobulated in a way all these years, and what I have learned is immense patience. I mean, the patience that I'm sure every person on this call has is exemplary, and something that can be taught to those that we love and those around us.
I think that's exactly right. That's part of what this is about. Is I actually think that and Dave, I want to go to you next. Exactly because of the practice that we have to have, because it is a practice. It grows certain things and not other things as well. And if you look at our culture, guess what they need? They need different time practices, right? Like they really do. And so it's in different time realizations. Dave, thanks for being patient. You've had your hand up forever.
That's all good. So I am now retired, so I feel like I've survived. I've done it.
You stepped into a bigger field of time, man.
So I get to recuperate as much as I like during the day by just laying and staring at the ceiling or whatever I want to do. But I'm 40 years on from becoming quadriplegic. And I did work full time for 35 plus of those years. Married for 32 years. I've been a father for 27. And I've done that without having any PCA help. And I'm quadriplegic. And I've done that by depending upon rigor and schedules and planning. And it was sort of based on my there was a nurse in rehab that said, Dave, the guys that survive and do well, do things repetitively with planned anticipation and just always the same. So, and I look at it, the trade-off is I take 2 hours in the morning when I was working to get up in the morning, maybe 3 hours to get to the office. It takes me a half hour to get my pants on. But I feel more able because I'm taking care of myself than rushing and using a PCA. So it was a solid choice to make. But there's to survive and thrive with a disability, you just really have to plan. And you have to.
Yeah, and think of all the practice. I mean, in a half hour to put on your pants, that's a significant amount of time, right? I mean, it makes you want to not take off your pants as often, by the way, right? Or it's for God's sakes to ever change clothes in a day. Diminish, it's like, it's not happening. You're putting on one pair of clothes and you're keeping them unless there's a disaster, right? Like there are all these different funny little things that people don't actually fully know, right? Like, so one of the funny things that happens to me exactly because of time and stuff is because I've injured my shoulders and torn my rotator cuffs, right? I often have been not pulling my pants on all the way. Like, so I wear them like half mass and I try to pretend that nobody notices. But because exactly, I don't want to do that 10,000 more times. I'm about to teach a workshop all next week and I will be coming in and out of there with pants half on. I'll have shorts on. I'll look like a cool hipster, but there will be on purpose me not doing that. And so, and it gets back to the energy thing that Audrey's talking about. It's because I don't want to wear out my shoulders like that. It's time and it's wear, and it's like you got to decide. And those that your story of being able to work that long, Dave, and being able to be productive. There's a huge mind-body practice you've been practicing for those 35 years. Right. And
if I don't stay in my lane, there's the danger factor as well.
What was that?
The danger factor. It's like if I don't do it this way, I might trip, I might fall, there's just like some minor change, and there's a cascading effect that ends up with something really negative happening.
Changing is change. One of the things about having the things take more time is that, man, change is almost always seems like it's going to be bad, right? Like I get the solving the life with routine, but then it has its effect too, right? And so, Marilee.
Hi, thanks for calling on me. This is my first time to this group, and I appreciate everyone's candor and sharing. I have mobility issues because of osteoarthritis in my knees and have become increasingly hobbled, but can't get surgery because my BMI is too high. So I don't know if this is where I'm at right now. That's all I know. And I guess I wanted to say one of the things I've become aware of as I'm becoming increasingly, my world is getting increasingly smaller, is people's expectations and what they are thinking that you should be able to be doing, or why aren't you doing more of this or more of that? And part of it's education. It's I need to let them know what's real. And I think we all have to do that and share what's real for us. And that anything can take people out of their current life. It can be a physical problem, it can be a mental health problem, it can be someone else's problem in their family, but it can take you out of what seems like the ordinary stream of life. And it's the lucky person who doesn't have that happen at some point in their life. But that sharing that, and also in some ways preparing people for that. Your life is going wonderful right now. That's great, but it may not always be so. And so how will you rise to meet that challenge?
Yeah, no, I think that's right on. I mean, and you know, the one thing I would like, and obviously I've been talking this year about the superpowers that have to develop when you live with a disability. And I go back to Kevin Kling's definition is that disability is an unability. It's ability that's traveled through shadow and reflection, right? And there are a whole bunch of people that go through life without having the forced upon them shadow and reflection that make them realize a different way of doing it, a different way of being. And I find also there to be a paradox in me is that exactly, not to the extent, Dave, that you were just talking about, but I too kind of have to get in certain lanes to get through my life, right? And to move through it. And where I like what you're saying, Marilee, and I'm not good enough at this, is telling people what's actually real, because I spend so much time just doing it at, you know, after hours, or doing it where nobody sees, or not, you know, so even the people closest to me don't know the reality of what it is to live with the situation I live with. But at the same time, as I'm in those ruts, I also do need to try new things. That's the other thing, you know. It's like, remember to have good experiences and to see, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And so there's the trade-off where I do want my edges pushed a little bit, but I more need people to understand what's the truth, right? And do it in a way that doesn't make them feel bad, right? Which is also part of the challenge of living with a disability, right? Is like, you know, you don't want to elicit sympathy only, you know, like that doesn't feel good. And yet you don't want to make them feel bad either.
Right. I do think that, but the most important part is being truthful with yourself, is recognize, just knowing where you're at and what is real for you with yourself. And that can be hard sometimes. I mean,
with time, I suck at it. I love what Laura said, that I've never done it in a half hour, not in my whole life. And you still want to believe it's a half hour, right? And yet for me, there's something crucial about believing it's a half hour. It's a funny thing, but the half hour, I don't let create pressure. If I don't make the half hour, I don't panic. But I like to think of myself as being able to do it in a half hour. Ellen, I think you need to unmute. Yep.
Well, I'm learning a lot from the discussion, and I'm not per se in a wheelchair or disabled, but it's very interesting to learn from what you guys have to say. And
Yeah. Ellen,
yeah.
I didn't mean to call on you. There are two Ellens on the
Oh, I'm
call.
sorry.
And no, it's okay. If you want to keep saying, I just feel bad. I think I called on you when I was actually going for a different Ellen because she was up in my box.
I don't anyway.
Okay.
But I just am learning. I think that you guys have a lot to give to us about your experiences and opening my eyes to what your experience of time is compared to mine, which is, I'm getting old, so I'm slowing down too, but you're giving a lot to me.
That's part of the hope of these things.
Yes,
For
definitely.
sure.
And
So
I
now
think-
the different Ellen, Ellen's iPad is who we're talking to.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'll be quiet.
Oh,
No, it's all good.
Okay.
oh, thank you. I'm Ellen, and I've been paraplegic for 7 years. I'm 65, and when I was 58, I suddenly survived a small plane crash. So yes, I'm lucky to be here. But it was a very sudden change. Might as well wake up on a different planet, is the way I describe it. And I guess what I want to say is, this isn't it, but I thought of something. If you don't have time to meditate for 20 minutes, meditate for an hour. I heard that somewhere. I love that. But what I want to share about a little bit is my experience of time and energy. Less of both now, especially less energy, it seems like. And I am aging as well, which makes it confusing for me. I don't know if it's because now I'm carrying around some paralyzed legs and a wheelchair, and that makes life take longer, everything, and takes more energy, or I'm also aging. But my husband and I just finished a 2-month trip to Europe, which was wonderful. But the challenge that we have that we're still figuring out, he's very healthy and very, very strong bodybuilder by hobby. And I just don't have the energy I used to have. You know, I might go do one cool thing in the morning, but then I need to spend the rest of the day resting in the hotel room. And I don't really like it either. I like it even less when I fight with myself about it. And I feel bad about it because he would like to be going out and doing more things than I either just don't have the energy for, or if I do too much, it makes my legs hurt. I get nerve pain. And it's kind of a spiral down once that kicks in. Pretty typical for those of us with paralysis, I think. But what I wanted to talk about is if I lived all by myself and had no interactions with anybody ever, it would be one thing, but my style profoundly affects and limits what, in this case, my husband is able to do, especially when we're in a Spanish-speaking country, because I'm the one that speaks Spanish. So he's much less likely to just go out and do something. So anyway, that's the hard part for me, is that it doesn't.
Really hard. I mean, I think that you know, like one of the superpowers, not just in relationship to time, but one of the superpowers that all of us in varying places has mastered is acceptance. And so I'm actually okay with the fact that I'm not going to choose. The energy is too much. The community is for me to gallivant and try to backpack across Europe, for example, like that. That early on, my brother was able to do that, you know, my older brother, and that, what a great thing. I didn't get to it, but I'm actually okay. Like, so I put this in kind of heavier terms, like we're masters at disappointment, right? That like, that's one of our superpowers, that there are just places that are not, I make a joke and say, I'm never going upstairs at someone's house, right? I'm never going to see their upstairs. I'm going to miss a whole bunch of views. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to climb the mountain to get to the view because my identity, I don't want to spend the energy to do that. And your issue about having people around you, you know, the worst thing for me is when I know I don't want to do something or can't do something, and then everyone else feels they can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's like, no, you got to go do, have the strength to go do. I'm
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I might feel a little sad. This isn't, I wish I could be doing that, but,
Yeah.
it makes me worse when all of a sudden, no, I don't want to make you feel bad. It's like, for God's sakes, you make me feel bad by staying. Right?
Yes.
I know how to
Yes.
have my time.
Yes.
It's not all dependent on me doing what you're doing. Right.
Right.
Right. And that's one of the really hard things, right? Is when you're not going to be able to be as physical, have the energy to go do, and empowering others to do what they do. Looks like he's in the background there. See, there's the weightlifting guy. So I get that issue. It's a big issue. Does anyone in their relationships have any advice on that? About?
Oh, can I say something?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that I totally, am fine, or I think the acceptance has to be not only for the person who has a disability, but the person that has to go off and walk around Sevilla in Spain by themselves in the evening. When that's okay, but I'm happiest when I'm with Ellen doing something.
He likes you. He likes you, Ellen. This is good.
Yeah, I would prefer to be out with her, but I can't, so I have to accept that I can't.
I think that's a big thing. And also, how do you deal with, and I don't know what your name is, sir, but like the thing that parts of Ellen's life takes more time. Like that waiting you have to do or whatever. Is that hard on you? Ellen, is that hard on you that he has to wait? Right? That what's that?
We find a compromise, I think, when Corey is around, especially for traveling. I let him put on my compression knee socks for me. Takes me 15 minutes, takes him 2. But yeah, he's also very patient. I mean, it takes me longer in the bathroom, and he can't fix that. He just has to wait.
Yeah, that's been a struggle for 7 years for me, is simply learning to be okay with just being. And that I don't have to be accomplishing anything at any certain time in order to be, worthwhile. And so I don't think
that's funny. That's like a superpower. Learning to be with just being. Yeah, that's like a huge one.
I think that's what I've learned about disability, not having disabled myself, but that there is no difference. That everybody in the world's problems are exactly the same. They just manifest in different ways that you have to come to grips with life's lessons.
I think that is the case. I do think that is the case. Good. Laura, your hand's up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I do think that the longer you live with it, like you do, I mean, certain things you accept it in a different way. Like recently, like I used to do that, like you said, I used to do the thing like later on when no one was around, or like I would park my car like far away so that no one would see, or like I was, I'd be like not near the building so that my friends wouldn't be like, it wouldn't, and then they'd be like, where did you? And I'd be like, that's fine, just over there. Like they'd be like, okay. And I made life a lot harder for myself than it needed to be. And I had to expand a lot more energy than I needed to when I was younger. I could have saved a lot more time and energy if I had just did it in front of people and had them be uncomfortable if they were, or just lived with my own discomfort and how long it would take. But that took me a long time to learn. And recently I was having coffee with a friend and she texted me to say that she was running late, and I said, no problem. And then she came and she said, I'm really sorry, Laura. And I said, oh, we went to college together. And I said, you spent a lot of time in college waiting for me. And she said, yeah, but you had to do a lot more than we had to do. And I was really touched by that. Whereas if she had said that to me in my 20s, I would have been mortified. I would have been horrified. I would have been like, what do you mean? No, I can do it.
Believe it or not, you weren't invisible and they realized that you
Yeah, like they could see it, but I was still like parking the car. Like
exactly.
So unnecessarily, they were just sweet enough not to say anything. They were just like, let her do what she needs to do. And it was obvious anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like I was trying to make it not obvious and making life, expounding a lot more time and energy than it really needed to be. Like sometimes you can add to that with disability than you need to in order to sort of, because you think you're making other people comfortable, and it's not.
I do believe I karmically for the rest of my life never get to complain about anyone being late. Like
Yeah, I never get out about it. I'm always like,
that
yeah,
one right
fine.
back, right? No matter
Yeah,
what.
I'm always like,
It's like, ugh,
fine, don't worry
whatever,
about it.
right?
Yeah.
It's
I'm very good at
silly
waiting.
reasons
I
why
can
you're
wait.
late.
It's fine. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a funny one. It's a funny one. Okay, and then Marianne. And then I want to practice a little bit because I want to show you some different
yeah, no, I would just say to the couple, it's, my husband and I, we had to go through, I've had a progressive neurodegenerative disease for 22 years now, and we've gone through lots of highs and lows, and just with each kind of new onset of a new round of disability, we've been less and less able to do things that we used to do. And I would say we've just given ourselves time to grieve the us that we no longer, trips that we can't take now that, would be very, we still do things, but they're very, very different. And it's like, and we just laugh, we say we get to grow old together and we get to, be disabled together. But we just laugh at a lot of things. I mean, humor goes a long way, and we've laughed at new levels of intimacy. Let's just put it that way, with pulling up each other, him pulling up my pants, or, just laughing like, do you realize this is the first time that you've had to do this for me? And it just really goes a long way to that acceptance. Acceptance is a great thing to say and to own and have that superpower, but it does take time to get to that level of acceptance. So I would just say that.
That's part of it. I mean, like in a way, grieving is a great time cleanser. You don't realize, like Laura, you think about Laura's example, like she was parking the car away thinking that she was, and she was doing all this extra stuff, the things we bring in because we're carrying way more into our space time that we're living in than we need to. And in fact, if you do some healthy grieving of the changes, right, that it opens up. Does anyone ever not feel better after a really good cry? I mean, a real big one, right? It's
right, but see, sometimes it's not acceptable if you have a disability to say, I'm really sad about this, because that means, oh, you're feeling sorry for yourself. Well, and I just, over the years, I've known it's been the healthiest thing for me to openly admit and say, man, I am down for the count with this. I don't have any superpowers. I feel miserable. And I know I'm going to get to another place eventually. I know it. But right now, I'm not there, and I'm okay with it. And I've had to get to a place where I'm okay with other people not being okay with it. So it's all a practice. It's all a practice.
What Samantha was saying, that's a profound wisdom to pass on. That point, like, no, have you not been into it? We've all been in a place where we're just spent. We got nothing, right? And we know that we persist. You know what I mean? Like that is exactly the type of place that is what resilience is. It's not withstanding those places so they never happen.
Yeah.
It's trusting that time keeps moving, right?
I mean, and that is the paradox. Paradox of holding both, holding great grief, and then also holding great happiness and acceptance. They're both present, and I don't think I could get through this without acknowledging both of those.
Yeah, and and so I want to practice a little bit because we have like about a half hour left and a little less. And I mean, I for me, and this is very personal, like the time that I didn't eat for 60 days in the hospital, and then I was like on a fast from time was so slow, and yet it was blank. Emily Dickinson's line, time has an element of blank, right? Pain has an element of blank, which is you can, when you're in it, it's really bad. And then when you're past it, you're like, wait, what was that? Resilience, starts new. is that the idea that, or the sensation that that time will keep going forward is a really profound, for me, has been a very profound realization. So one of the things about the experience of time, have you noticed that when things, this isn't always true, but when things get quiet, our perception of time slows down? Right? That like when the silence becomes, so everyone sit up straight and tall. So in that centering part of a yoga class, so like I know this sounds barfy, but if you open to the realization that the center of your chest is already integrated with the space around you, that the time is actually happening together. And we tend to think of ourselves as in relationship to time. But in fact, part of whether you do get this in meditation or even just in centering, one of the essential practices is to quiet the mind down so the time isn't an object, because we've already determined that when time is made into an object or not, or just something we perceive, it ends up varying so greatly, right? And so sit up straight and tall, feel your feet on the floor. And when you do more inward stuff, like balance your head over your neck, soften your organs of perception, right? Your jaw, the inside of your mouth, the skin on your face, the energy around your eyes. When you get to Shavasana, so for example, often a 20-minute Shavasana is not as good as a 5-minute Shavasana, okay? When you get to a certain place, the amount of time isn't as important, right? That doesn't mean that you can not sleep enough at night, right? But as you sit and allow and feel and use the steadiness of your body, when I said your body's in a steadier relationship to time than your mind is. This is part of why Patanjali is talking about slowing the oscillations of the mind. There's a steady connection between what's quiet in you and what's quiet around you. The writers in the Bhagavad Gita will actually tell you that level of connection is unchanging. Seems like a pretty radical claim. Well, let it be true. You're just not slowing down time so you can be aware and judge more of the happening. You're slowing down your mind to be the happening. Which is part of what Corey, I think that was his name, Ellen's partner, was saying, no, I just realized I had to practice how to be with just being, right? There's a lot. So this energy that we're accessing is why Samantha said we've all had to develop patience. What I don't want people to miss is that my patience is not a function simply of my acceptance. It's an active realization. I've realized something about how time passes. It's not a sacrifice. You don't need to feel sorry for me. I actually know something here that a lot of people don't. And I can access it better when I go inward, when I balance my head over my neck, when I soften the base of my tone, when I keep my lips slightly touching and my teeth slightly apart, when I feel the whole room. Good, and then release. I think it's easy to believe in your yoga practice that if you practice time well, you should be holding poses longer. Incorrect, in my opinion. You want to practice time and speed, right? In different variations. So the idea that, oh, if you just hold the pose, like there's a whole style of yoga, yin yoga and restorative yoga is like based on longer holds. Okay, but practicing time doesn't just mean slowing it down. It's recognizing its ebb and flow. And so you're gonna wanna have centering. So, you know, I don't do well if the centering is over like 5 minutes. Could I do it? Yeah, I'm gonna have to fight some other demons. Is it functional for my home practice to do a long time centering? No. Do I do as long of a shavasana as I should in my home practice? Typically not. Except if I stay there a long time, I sleep. You know why? Because I'm freaking tired, right? Like at the quiet dawn of relief, I often recognize my fatigue, right? And that's okay. I get to be tired in my quietest spots. That's my body saying, yeah, I need some restoration, some recuperation, right? And so having that more intimate relationship to time is really important. When you practice balance, have you noticed that, you know, people, again, we use our will with balancing poses, right? We like say, oh, if we can balance for a long time, I must be better at it. No, another fallacy. Extending time doesn't mean mastering time. So all of you, I would like you to practice different kinds of balance. So one of the balances that I think, and I want my balance to be smooth, right? So I want everyone sit up straight and tall right now. So we often define balance in trainings as the equal distribution of presence. Not just being in the present, not just a mental relationship to the present as opposed to the future or the past. That's mental. My mind goes in and out of phase, in and out of things. My body stays here, right? So when I say be in the present, no, I want balance to be realized that am I as much in my feet and sitting bones as I am in the lift of the chest? Can I learn to equalize my effort? Right now, that's going to take time. Okay, learning to equalize your effort in a pose. So as you sit up straight and tall, and you'll see some of the instructions. So in order to feel this, I'm already having to practice pratyahara. So as you're sitting up straight and tall, hopefully you're withdrawing out of your eyes a little bit, right? I want you to feel where your sitting bones are, which I can't directly feel, where my inner heel is, and can I lift my chest and broaden across the collarbones without disrupting the whole? Can the whole, W-H-O-L-E, be the teacher, not my effort? Can the whole adjust me? Yes, if you change your relationship to time. Right? And it doesn't necessarily mean slower. And then what whacks me out is that all this can stay the same and I can move fast. So don't confuse slow and fast time with quick movements. Have you ever felt that racing, sometimes happens with anxiety, like the racing feeling, and things get really loud, the silence late at night in your house gets super loud, and all of a sudden you feel it firing, like things are going really fast, but everything's staying really quiet? Those times you kind of know what I'm talking about, right? That you kind of like are afraid to tell anyone about, like, oh my God, right? Those are your different relationships to time, right? So the quieting down, if you truly quiet down, you don't have to hold the poses as long. Okay, holding poses longer when you're fighting gravity tends to injure you, right? So you got to be careful with overwilling and holding your poses. But you still want to reap the benefit of slowing down time. Okay, so there are practices that I do. I have my own practices where I'm not just practicing hands in prayer, I'm practicing time. And I don't mean the duration of how long I stay in hands in prayer. I mean literally the textures of sensation. So if you can't bring your hands in prayer, otherwise put your hands on your thighs or on the table, right? And all the precision, one of the things I realized that biggest anger was teaching precision for was not to speed up time, but to slow it down, right? So your hands are together. Can you feel the connection at the heel of your hand? If you go slow and then make that connection, as soon as you press a little more at the heel of your hands, and if you're on the table down, do that. Notice what happens to the energy of your shoulder blades. Now, can you get the connection between the heel of your hands and the energy of your shoulder blades and make sure it touches your sitting bones and your feet? You're damn right you can. Right? The happening was always happening. My mind's relationship to the time was messed up. So now I'm going to place then my knuckles here together, right? And now I've got more connection, and then my fingers. And so now I'm going to open and spread my palm. But you know what I'm not touching? I'm not letting this space touch my skin on my hands. Right? So I'm going to let that in. I'm going to watch when I exert and open my palms and lengthen my fingers, what happens to the rest of my body. Time has to be received in a yoga practice. And then your breath is like water. By the way, your lungs are moist for a reason. Your breath has moisture in it, right? So, and then release. So am I a better yoga student because I hold poses longer? No. When I encounter yoga teachers, and I have done this, especially at yoga journal conferences where they're trying to be really kind of deep and new agey, and they do like a 20-minute centering. It's like they're trying to outprove and outlast their students and how long they can hold things. It's the quality of contact between you and time, right? Like the quality of the movement in relationship. Like, how do you move? Like, how do you do two things at once? So if I want to become aware and feel things rather than think things. So already I'm doing this simple little dumb time practice, right? Simple little dumb where I'm leaning forward and moving my fingers, right? So at first I have to go slow to see all the complexity of it, right? And then, so do something like this, figure out something you're doing right now, right? And then practice it a little faster, see what's lost and see what's gained, right? I tend to lose something when I start moving faster, except do I have to, right? So I've got multiple things going on right now, right? And then I'm gonna go back to the midline So I'm taking a movement that looked like not a yoga pose. I'm making it have movement. I'm watching it rhythmically in time. And then I'm finding the midpoint again. Because now when I want to do that same movement again, I'm going to want to keep the midline with the action. Right? So I'm going to do it again here. So I'm doing this, I'm leaning forward. My whole spine's coming forward. I'm beginning to include more of me in this pose now. I'm actually now becoming a whole here. And the speed is moving up. And it doesn't mean this has to move. It means that I want more of me to be part of the movement. More of me as part of the movement. Right? And that means I'm expanding out through time in my practice. Now, it seems goofy. I'm using weird words. I'm telling you, this is happening in every pose, right? So I can tell I was just leaning on one elbow too much. You know why? Because the length of time showed me fatigue started coming to one of my arms, right? So I'm going to have to go the other way and do a similar movement, leaning more on the other arm. And I'm going to make sure my spine moves with my moving hands, right? And I'm going to make sure, and now I'm going to get down to my feet, right? And I'm going to move all of me in relationship to this. You know why? Because time is going slow inside my perception, right? Even though the complexity of movement is entering the pose. How do you think these advanced yogis do such crazy poses? They're not speeding up their relationship to time, right? And the precision is part of what's showing it to you, right? So again, so like I'm going to come forward and back again. These are things we do all the time in my Monday class, right? And if I don't want to be there all the way, I just go back and forth and make it be physical, right? Time is happening, but it's not traveling through me in the same way, right? It's just going and I'm just moving. Just how you move through your life and do your shit, right? You never actually let in the sensation of time. Well, can you so now I'm going to make it more. And this is what I realized Bika Singer was trying to show me: time with precision, not necessarily complex effort, right? So all these extra things weren't to increase the effort. They were to show me the dimension of time, right? And then practice allows your mind not to get caught up in the particularity of the precision, right? So I'm going to watch, at first I got to go a little bit slower because I want to feel where my feet are and come forward and back and watch my spine. And wait, I'm going to try to bring all the empty space with my spine from behind me as I come forward. And then I'm going to smile it up. So I'm going to like go that way, right? And then back. And so to do all that at first, I got to go slow, right? So I'm moving through this space-time dimension. Don't forget space is time, right? Right there, it's space-time, right? So you can practice space to feel time, right? And so now I'm going to start speeding up, but I want the contact with the space around me to remain the same, right? So I'm going to go a little faster, right? But faster is not better. Sacrifice occurs when I speed up, when I increase the velocity of movement, right? And then I'm going to wait, I got to release support and get, so I did all that forward stuff, right? And then I'm going to come back to midline again. And I want to find it. I want to find midline. So this idea of practicing space and time, when you're practicing, that's part of what's happening. When I ask you to feel the space between the shoulders and your ears and your shoulders, when I try to get you to open to space, time starts slowing down. It's hard to feel space fast, right? So your time, so you know how I learned this? I watched people doing triangle pose, right? And And I started thinking about, and if you know my teaching, I'm often teaching negative spaces and poses. That's why I teach this space and the space behind you and the space in front of you. So I started to think about this as part of their pose, right? And to be in the whole space, your internal relationship to time has to slow down. And then, have you ever watched Bikis Iyengar go into Trikonasana? The dude is moving really fast. He's not moving slow, right? He comes into poses quickly and out of poses quickly. And it's like, wait, how are you feeling everything if you're moving fast? And I started thinking, wait, something else is going on. His relationship to slowing down time allows him not to have to effort the poses too much. So now everyone take your arms wide. So in order for you to feel the space under your arms connected to the space between your ears and your shoulders, what do you have to do? How do you fill space? Good, and then release. So I took my arms down because my rotator cuff's hurting me, but like, can you fill space quickly? Not without violence. That filled space, right? If I am with space, I have to be with time, right? Unless I create violence, right? So this idea, like things like, for example, when I teach in the beginning of classes, and I have you lift up and put your low back in traction and then set down lighter, right? Not only do I have to move slower and not collapse fast, I feel the extension in my pose as slowing down time, right? That I'm practicing it all the time. You know why I want relief? Relief doesn't speed up time, it slows down time, right? You get to feel things. So I'm going to keep long. And I'm practicing keeping the time and space in my body as I release. So when you're stretching your low back, which is another thing I do a lot in poses, right? I'm getting you to come forward and take the time to actually feel your sitting modes. And then the instructions, like, okay, feel your sitting modes, lift your sternum, broaden across your sacrum and find your inner heels, right? And once you get that sense of extension, let time into your pose. Don't let your effort, your physical effort, collapse your sense of time, right? You want to know that your pace is your pace. So, and then release. So, there's a Zen koan. I can't find the book that I love. It's right here, damn it. I'm scared to pull it out of the pile because everything's gonna fall. But one of the really short Zen koans is and I think this has a lot to do with disability and living with disability. A student comes up to who he hopes to be a Zen teacher and his holding he's traveling, you know, he's walking, he's got his rice bowl and says, teacher, you know, please, I want to practice and move towards enlightenment. And all the teacher says is, go wash your bowl, right? Go wash your bowl. I hope you can figure out how, and I go through phases where I'm not as able to do this as well, but the time it takes for you to manage your body is washing your bowl. Anything can become an exploration practice. I mean, Dave, I've got to imagine the 2 hours and the half hour it took you to pull up your pants, if you try to win that half hour, you're going straight to hell, right? He must have found how to move in those spaces without just being fixated on getting his pants up. When that little kid jumped out of the water and ran around to run up the slide, you know what I know he's missing as he rushes to one ride down the slide to the other? He's not feeling his feet on the steps as he's walking up the steps. For him, he's got it, the velocity to the water and then out again. And he's not seeing the whole process, right? He's racing after time, which is part of what youth does, right? And maybe there is something to what's being said. The true spiritual life, this is what they say in India, can't begin until you're 60. Sometimes I want to offer a different version of that. And true spiritual life can't begin until you're disabled. It's an unbelievable teacher, right? And practicing moving different parts of your body at different velocities is also part of your practice. And I'll try to teach that on Monday. But although we didn't do a whole practice, when you start to observe different things in time, right? In your practice, right? Different things moving at different velocities, right? Right? You are having to practice pratyahara. You're having to withdraw back towards the midline. And that there's part of you that doesn't change even as things are constantly changing. That's time, right? In my opinion, like you and we are in a position with patience and having to know we're going to take more time and to be internally optimistic. Part of my thing, right? That it's not going to take much time. These are all things we're practicing. I should end because I said, but I'll stay on after and talk for a while or listen to comments. I'm hoping that some of that weird stuff about your practice made sense. Was it too bizarre? I can't tell. I was telling you all my secrets, right there. Like there's so much going on in the yoga practice, right? And it's also so simple, right? Different velocities, different movements, different layers. And they're not for your mind to recognize, they're to be felt. Time is an experience, not an object. There's no winning time, right? You don't win with time. You actually experience time. And that, I think, is part of the Zen insight, the Zen awakening, which I'm not very good at practicing. But I love that there's a whole tradition that practices washing their bowl, right? That a whole path of enlightenment comes out of practice and repetition. All right, everybody. That's another installment. Thanks for everyone sharing their insights.